G'day everyone, my name's Nathan Backers and welcome to our March edition of the Power Hour. It's a very special edition this month because we're actually being included as a part of the AI powered business applications bootcamp. Bit of a mouthful. So hopefully you're able to check out some of the other sessions as a part of the bootcamp today, and we'll put a link in the chat for those as well. But today's Power Hour is going to be all focused around Microsoft Copilot Studio, which a lot of people don't know is actually not a new product. It's a rebranding of an existing product as a part of the Power Platform family, Power Virtual Agents. So plenty of customers have been using it for a number of years. And there's plenty of great customer stories out there about Power Virtual Agents, or what's known as Microsoft Copilot Studio as well. But with the rebranding or the new name of the product, there's also come a whole bunch of generative AI functionality, also the ability to extend Microsoft Copilots or first-party Copilots, and also deliver or build custom Copilots as well. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So the main presenter for today's session is Jack Moran. So Jack is a technical specialist for Power Platform or low code across the public sector, and also an absolute Copilot Studio whiz. We're also joined by Fu Shen and Scott Berry, who will be answering all of your questions in the chat. So fire away with as many questions as you like. We'll come on at the end and ask Jack some of those questions live as well. But Scott and Fu Shen will be answering those questions in the background. So any questions that you have, whack them in the chat and we'll get to them. Before I get started, we just wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. I'm presenting to you today from Awabakal country up in the Newcastle region, which is where I live. But as many of us are located from locations around Australia, we pay our respects to the traditional owners of the land in which we live and work. We recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, community, and pay our respects to them, their culture, and to their elders, both past, present, and emerging. So with that, I'll hand it over to the star of today's show, Jack Moran. So Jack, over to you, mate, and let's hear all about Microsoft Copilot Studio.
Thank you, Nathan. That was a great intro there, and I'm really glad to be able to be part of this Power Hour crew today for our March Power Hour. And I know there's going to be plenty of questions coming in the chat. Copilot Studio is the topic of the town as of late, and so it's just great to be here. And so, as Nathan said, I am a Power Platform technical specialist, and I work very closely with Nathan here, supporting our customers across ANZ. So what are we gonna be able to expect from today's Power Hour? So first, what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at essentially what the era of AI means for businesses and some historical considerations around conversational AI and why it potentially hasn't taken off until this kind of late introduction of kind of Copilot experiences, for example. Then we're going to look to define Microsoft Copilot and Copilot Studio more specifically, and then follow up with essentially how these different tools work together. We'll then jump into a bit of a live demo of Copilot Studio before we then wrap up and look at some licensing, which is always fun. We normally don't go into too much licensing on these conversations, but the licensing has been quite interesting for Copilot Studio. It's been quite a different take on how we go about licensing, and so I thought it would be really good to at least give a brief introduction of what that looks like now. And then, of course, at the very end, we'll have some time for some answers to some of your questions that are coming in the chat, and then we'll look at some next steps to get started with Copilot Studio today. So I think just to kind of level set around AI, what I wanted to do is just to talk about exactly what this all means. So from harnessing wind power to be able to sail across vast oceans, to being able to put the world's knowledge at our fingertips with the advent of smartphones throughout history, that right tool in the right set of hands has always really sparked transformation. And now we're seeing this next great shift in this new era of AI. And this shift isn't coming in a few years' time, and it's not really even in a few months. It really is now. And we're going to see that today, just how accessible this opportunity for AI transformation is. And I feel a bit silly now because I thought Game Boy Color was the game changer for all things, and now when I was a bit of a young boy there, and boy was I wrong. So this is really now we're in this new era of AI, and it's easily the most exciting shift, at least in my generation, and we can see just the impact already taking shape across these three dimensions here, across individuals, across entire teams, and across every industry that we see. And conversational AI is really the tip of the spear for this new era of AI. And so Gartner published a few of these really powerful statistics here, and just to illustrate how pivotal a role we can envision conversational AI playing in the next couple of years. So by next year, we can expect that around 80% of enterprise applications will have an embedded conversational assistant to assist the users with content fetching and generation. There'll also be a reduction in agent labor costs by about $80 billion by 2026, thanks to these conversational AI use cases within contact scenarios. And then by the end of the year, Gartner is predicting that 80% of conversational AI offerings will have some form of generative AI embedded to enhance those user experiences. So we saw those stunning statistics, but why are organizations looking to adopt conversational AI at speed? We see a number of different factors here. So we can start with enriching employee experiences, because organizations are essentially seeing that conversational AI can empower their employees to access information, to perform their tasks at work, to collaborate more efficiently and effectively. And so in this competitive labor market that we see, and with heightened expectations from employees across different organizations, these organizations can leverage conversational AI to really enhance that employee productivity, that employee engagement, and overall employee well-being, as well as simultaneously reducing training and support costs. Conversational AI can also be used to really help automate and optimize a lot of different business processes across customer service scenarios, sales, marketing, HR, and operations. It can also help organizations deliver faster and better outcomes for their employees, but as well as our customers. So we're seeing much more informed decision making because of conversational AI, seeing more innovation, obviously greater customer satisfaction, as well as this kind of reduced time to market and kind of corresponding operational costs. We also, looking across industries, conversational AI is helping businesses to create new and differentiated products and services, as well as actually fostering a culture of innovation and creativity within their organizations. It also helps businesses build deeper and more meaningful relationships with their customers, so they can bring in more personalization, they can make things more relevant and consistent across these different experiences and different channels. And the last one here, conversational AI can really help businesses reduce the time, the effort, and the resources required to develop, to deploy, and maintain their different conversational applications. So this is really going to lower the barrier to entry in terms of, and as well as lowering that adoption friction, as well as making sure that it's mitigating the risks of failure and potential obsolescence. So while the value seems fairly self-evident around conversational AI, most organizations don't really know where to start with this, because traditionally organizations have found that there's been a significant budgetary and time constraint, and found that to be a significant blocker when it comes to really having to hire qualified developers in such a competitive market. And then, of course, at the same time, they can't wait a year for a project to be delivered. They need it yesterday. Traditional developers or the development of conversational AI was also predominantly done in past. So organizations had to really think about the infrastructure requirements. How are they actually going to maintain it, and so on. An ongoing issue for organizations was essentially, how are they supposed to onboard new conversational AI solutions into their business? Who's going to actually need to be upskilled now within their business to be able to manage this and be able to actually deliver the value that is being promised there? And then, of course, integration with systems of record. I'm sure this is already probably giving some people heart palpitations on the call today. So how are we supposed to integrate all these different systems at our company to work with this conversational AI? That's always been quite a difficult challenge there. And naturally, we have concerns around security and compliance. So how do we engage our different security elements or security teams to make sure that this is really going to be an ongoingly compliant conversational AI experience that is essentially meeting our security requirements. And then lastly, who is going to be responsible to essentially ensure that the content that's being fed into the conversational AI is up to date, and that that conversational AI is also being kept up to date with all these different changes that are going on with the content. So I'm getting a little exhausted even kind of going through all these different considerations, the historical considerations, knowing how difficult it must have been for customers to try to adopt conversational AI and using these different kind of past tools and relying on professional developers to build and manage every element of this experience here. But with all that value that was available to unlock with conversational AI and knowing the corresponding burdens and blockers that organizations were finding in the adoption and management of conversational AI, Microsoft has really turned around and released these out-of-the-box SaaS solutions, SaaS tools that are infused with generative AI to really help empower organizations to rapidly adopt, to build, to manage these conversational AI experiences at scale. And these are for both employees, for customer-facing scenarios. And so this is where we've come to the buzzword of the day, or the buzzword of the year, I think, which is Copilot. So what is Copilot? It's the number one question that I get from customers day in, day out. And a Copilot is essentially an experience using generative AI and large language models to assist humans with complex cognitive tasks. But really, in its simplest terms, a Copilot is a conversational application that uses generative AI as part of its building components. So as part of a Copilot experience, you're going to be chatting in natural language. You're going to be able to determine, guide, and approve the different outputs of that Copilot. And of course, the more complex a cognitive task, from a user perspective, the greater the value of that Copilot experience. And now at Microsoft, we have this, it does seem fairly overwhelming, even for someone that works at Microsoft, at the number of Copilots that we've released. And from our perspective, we're trying to keep across everything. So it is a lot. I mean, we're seeing all these different Copilots come for every different scenario. But what we've been able to achieve in doing that is to essentially ensure that every role that you have in your business, there is a Copilot for you. We know that a Copilot isn't a one size fits all, that there isn't a single large language model or a user experience that's going to really serve every role in an organization. And so, for example, we have Copilot for M365 there, which is a fantastic tool for enabling productivity across the M365 stack. But then we also have the business applications lens, where we can look at where we're looking at salespeople, customer service people, and other business functions. And for them, we've released Copilots across Dynamics 365, like your Copilots for sales, your Copilots for service, and for finance. And to essentially, we're releasing those in the dynamic space to essentially ensure that workers across those different disciplines who essentially have Copilots with skills in those applications that they're using every day to essentially support their unique tasks, their unique scenarios. And this is where we come to Copilot Studio. And the way to customize and extend these different Copilot experiences is to ensure that you're actually serving the unique needs of every business as well. And this is really using Copilot Studio. So we want to be able to make sure that your Copilots are showing up in the applications that your employees are using every day. And through Copilot Studio, ensure that it has actually access to your company data, your experience, and the different experiences that matter most to them, whether it's the data is coming from Microsoft or it isn't coming from Microsoft. And so in Copilot Studio, you're able to author these additional conversational experiences that you want to enable in those first-party Copilots and publish them back to use in your Copilots. So of course, you don't just have to be able to, you're not just extending the first party Copilots, as Nathan said at the top of the call, with Copilot Studio. You're also able to build your own custom Copilots within Copilot Studio. So these standalone Copilots can really show up in any channel of your choice, whether it be a website, whether it be an application, or even in WhatsApp. So here on the left-hand side, we can see M365 Copilot, which is that productivity assistant that helps you get your work done, as I said before. And as I mentioned, it's extensible through Copilot Studio through this concept of plugins. And these plugins are authored inside Copilot Studio and then made available in M365 Copilot. We're then going to see, of course, as more and more, as we kind of move towards release dates, we're going to see more and more of these Copilots across across Microsoft, and we're going to see those copilots become extensible as well through Copilot Studio using these different plugins. So then if we look at the right-hand side here, we have custom copilots. This is where I want to be in full control over the channels that I talk to my copilot in, and essentially have full control over what it can, and very importantly here, cannot do. Right, so this is where you have to think, where does it make sense to use Copilot Studio versus a plugin in M365? If you want to have full control over that conversational orchestration, that dialogue, if you want to have a B2C scenario, if you want B2B scenarios, and of course, if you want to have that show up in the channel of your choice, you're choosing a custom copilot. And to essentially ensure, just at the bottom here, to ensure that there's no cliffs in your Copilot experience, you want to make sure you can, we've been able to make sure that you can extend those copilots through Azure AI Studio and other pro-code tools as well. So let's look at each one of these scenarios in a bit more detail. Now, there we go. So let's first look at extending Copilot for M365. So we can build a low-code plugin, as I said, in Copilot Studio, where you want to talk to your different data sources that aren't accessible through Microsoft Graph, and to essentially make that data available, whether they be from Microsoft or from a non-Microsoft data source. You can create low-code plugins in Copilot Studio when you have business scenarios that are unique to your business, and you want to actually build business processes and automations around that to access inside your Copilot experience. And although not exhaustive here, the last scenario here is essentially where you would want to create a plugin when you want to have control over the response to a specific question related to your business. So a good example of this would be essentially, how do I request remote access to my corporate network? So this is where I want to author a plugin where I don't want generative AI coming in and having some creativity. I don't want any creativity for this example here. And so this is the exact, I'm basically saying this is the exact process that I want to follow. Another example of where plugins for M365 Copilot would be applicable is if you wanted to have your finance team be able to get insights from their ERP system, whether that be an SAP or a Dynamics. With this plugin, if I have the security permissions to access my finance system, I would then be able to ask for a list of pending expenses for this week. I would have that insight pulled directly from my finance system and made available in this Copilot experience. So that's about extending Copilot for your specific business needs. Now let's look at creating a custom Copilot in Copilot Studio. So as I mentioned before, you can either create you can create either an employee experience or a customer-facing Copilot experience in Copilot Studio. And essentially, if you want that Copilot to talk to other systems of record inside or outside of Microsoft, if you want to publish that Copilot into different channels to best suit your end users' needs, you're creating a Copilot in Copilot Studio. If you want to have full control over what that Copilot can and, of course, cannot say, you're creating a custom Copilot. If you want to have a conversational orchestrator, so that dialogue manager to have different rules and logic that you can essentially author for your specific business needs, that's when you're creating a custom Copilot in Copilot Studio. And it's important to understand that Copilot Studio isn't just an authoring canvas. That is definitely a piece of what it is. It really is this end-to-end SaaS conversational application building platform. And being a SaaS platform, you aren't building and managing infrastructure. It's there out of the box. You have security and governance that is built into the system, right? So this is the classic value of SaaS, and we've brought that to Copilot authoring here. And so what are some examples of custom Copilot experiences being built in Copilot Studio? Well, here we have a customer-facing scenario where a customer at any time of the day can ask their customer experience Copilot for a receipt of their recent purchases. And you can see here, after authenticating the user, it will essentially pull that information from their Dynamics system to have that receipt emailed to that customer. And then, as you can see here as well, you have these multiple intents from the essentially multiple queries from the customer derived and then actually actioned from that single user question. So we can see here we've also provided them with a product guide and proactively delivered some recommendations based on their recent purchases. So on the other hand here, we can look at internally facing custom copilots, which can be authored in Copilot Studio, where you can seamlessly communicate with multiple systems of record in this multi-turn conversation here. So here we're asking for an onboarding process from an HR system and to find out what that team's budget is for learning and development from their finance system. So two different systems having that singular multi-turn conversation there. So as we look at this, looking at building custom copilots through Copilot Studio, it's really important to note here that these are single exemplars of many, and these are just experiences that you're unlocking in a copilot. So these can be unlocked for employee experiences, customer copilot experiences, all done within Copilot Studio. And then, of course, as I noted before, there's no cliffs when building these custom copilots. You can build your custom copilot in Azure, or you can, not the custom copilot, but the custom model in Azure AI Studio, and then plug those right into your custom copilot experiences that you've built in Copilot Studio. And of course, you can definitely build the full conversational orchestration for a custom copilot in AI Studio. You can do that, but of course, at what cost? How much time and energy do you want to spend on that? So if you are comfortable building out your copilot, its infrastructure, its security, using the PaaS capabilities there, you can absolutely do that. But of course, like with low code in general, the thought is here for Copilot Studio, the real point of Copilot Studio is to really make it easier, make it quicker and cheaper for our customers to be able to develop these copilots through this SaaS platform here. So Azure AI Studio it's all about putting that model in your control. There's some really great scenarios where Azure AI Studio should be leveraged to really meet some specific business needs, and we're actually going to look at some of them in the presentation today. Essentially, what it's especially good at is, say, if I wanted to generate something and I wanted that to look exactly like this, and I could supply it with some examples and get really specific about it. So that's where Azure AI Studio is just fantastic. But as we're going through this, and of course, there's so much value there in building out those custom copilots. It's important to actually remember that we can, of course, do all that very nuanced and custom work in Azure AI Studio, and then just plug that in to your conversational orchestrator in Copilot Studio in the SaaS platform. So as we've gone through these different scenarios, you may be thinking, like I did when I first started working with these different tools, is who's actually building this then? So do I need a professional developer to manage all of this? Can this be done just by business users with no tech experience? How about these traditional low code makers who are a bit more familiar with the Power Platform? Can they build this? And the answer is yes, which isn't probably super helpful there, but in reality, we see that business and low code makers who are familiar with the business process are actually ideal candidates to be building these plugins, right, for your copilots inside Copilot Studio. So we can have people that are familiar with the needs of finance, for example, build a plugin that communicates to the organization's finance system so that using their specific domain knowledge, they can create those specific experiences for the unique needs for that finance domain. Low-code makers can also create employee and customer-facing copilots, and then essentially when they've hit the limits of the SaaS capabilities, as we mentioned before, for that specific scenario or nuanced scenario that they're trying to deal with, they can lean on their professional development teams to actually develop that powerful custom model in Azure AI Studio to address that specific business requirement. The business and low-code makers then can actually plug that model into their copilots in Copilot Studio and then continue building. And then from a professional developer point of view, they can leverage that speed and out-of-the-box infrastructure of Copilot Studio to have all those kind of core elements, the dialogue essentially rapidly spun up, and then spend the majority of their time building out these custom models and capabilities in Azure AI Studio to supplement the initial Copilot build in Copilot Studio. All right, so we're about to jump in a bit of a demo. So I thought what we would do is take a look at Adam, who's a low-code maker and is familiar with the Power Platform. He works in HR at Power Hour Incorporated, And today we're going to see essentially how Adam's going to be able to start building out a bit of an employee services Copilot for his colleagues at Power Hour Inc. So he wants to first ensure that his users are able to ask questions and get responses related to general company information. But unfortunately, the site for Power Hour is down today. There's overwhelming traffic. So he's decided to use the Microsoft website to really test out this functionality while they get the website back up and running. And then using his domain knowledge in HR, he wants to be able to have his employees ask questions regarding leave policies that are documented in his HR SharePoint site. And of course, if they so desire, actually make it possible for them to submit leave requests through his Copilot to the HR system. And finally, because he knows there's a huge team of Power Hour evangelists or Power Platform evangelists for Power Hour, they're out there day in, day out. He wants to make sure that Copilot is able to give them up-to-date weather forecasts so they can stay dry. So I'm going to pop over now into my browser here. And so you can see here we are in the Copilot Studio canvas here. And so to start with, we can look at what essentially the traditional building blocks of a Copilot. Many of you would be familiar with these tools from Power Virtual Agent days. And so if I come in here, I can see all the manually authored topics that we can build out, the system topics, and of course we can continue to create those from blank, where we're able to start with essentially the trigger, what was traditionally phrases. Now with dynamic chaining, we can also describe essentially when we want that topic to be triggered, and we can add different messages and questions, conditions, and take some actions there as well. Those topics are now supplemented with this ability to create topics from that initial essentially structure for your topics via Copilot, providing a description and a name of a topic, and it'll help build that initial topic build for you. But what's probably the most important elements today to kind of discuss and where we want to focus our attention on, as Adam is in here, he's building this this experience out for his users. Adam wants to come in and provide the publicly facing site and his internal SharePoint site so he can achieve those specific end goals that we highlighted in the slide there. And so what he's first going to do is he's provided this publicly facing site, and what that essentially does by providing it to this generative AI capability called generative answers, it's allowing his users to actually chat over that data set. So the publicly facing site and the internally facing SharePoint site, it's going to allow his user, of course, if authenticated for the SharePoint site, to chat over both of these essentially that corpus of data to essentially get the right response for that user's query. And so let's give this a little bit of a test run here. Because we're using the Microsoft site and I thought this would be topical, we're going to ask the full Microsoft site with all the different subpages in there, why are people so excited about Copilots, and more specifically Copilot Studio? So you can see here it's taken us to this topic here, where it's essentially saying we don't have an authored topic for this scenario. Please use generative answers to actually respond to that request. And we can see we're using a publicly facing site and an internal SharePoint site, and we can see the response here has come back with two different subpages within the Microsoft website to be able to kind of collate this effective response here to our end user's prompt. And what's really great there is it really demystifies this engagement with generative AI here. We can see exactly where it got that information from. And of course, if there's action that needs to be taken based on what is provided, they can actually go into that site and take that follow-up action. I wanted to just follow that up with a bit more on how do we actually get started with Copilot Studio. Shameless plug, and we'll talk more about that at the end of the call. But if Adam wants to make sure that that information is available, he can come in here and prompt the site for that. And so fantastic. We can see here that the end user is able to come in and click this page here, and it's going to take them straight to the Copilot site where they can start trying Copilot Studio today for themselves. How fantastic is that? So we have looked at being able to chat over the general company information. So of course, when Power Hour is up, he's going to slot that in, and his end users are going to be able to have all that information available at their fingertips to chat over. But what about the SharePoint site that we saw here? What if we wanted to get essentially that annual leave policy? Adam wants to make sure that his end users have that available. So if I chatted here and asked for what the annual leave policy is, or leave policies in general, it's going to go into his SharePoint site. And because this end user is authenticated to see the SharePoint site content, he's going to be able to get a reply, which is going to talk about that specific annual leave policy. And so as that's coming up, you can see we're also just tracking the different topics here. So it's essentially as our conversation flows between topics through dynamic chaining, you can see essentially where the conversation is going and what is being triggered in this experience here. And so you can see here we have our HR policy. This is from SharePoint. We can even pull up the document. Probably don't need to do that now, but essentially it's taking that information from that document inside a SharePoint site and provided this guidance here. And so the end user is going to be happy. Adam's very happy now. He knows that this is working just as he had hoped, and he wants to have his end user submit a leave request. So once we hit submit leave, it's going to take us to another topic, which is now leveraging a different capability called generative actions. And so generative actions here allows us to talk to our systems of record. And so we'll look at it in just a second. Essentially, we're able to author this this input and output from our Copilot Studio, talking to our different systems of record and outputs that we want to make available to our end users. And that's what we've done here. So we're talking to our HR system. We've taken the name of the user from the system prompt, so we didn't even need to ask Adam for his name. And what we've done is we've provided the following outputs. We got annual leave, sick leave, parental leave, and so forth. And just to make that experience a bit more engaging, we provided an adaptive card that actually allows them to submit leave from this adaptive card experience. So you can see here it's provided the different days of leave that Adam has available, and now he can click in here and submit a leave request. So if I come through feeling pretty good about the number of days I have left, I'm going to give myself a full week of annual leave and feeling pretty happy about things. I'm going to say because I deserve it. So once we're happy with that, Adam here as the end user now is going to submit that request, and we can see we've captured that response. Because he hit submit instead of no thanks, it's gone to this condition and provided that essentially response there with all the information submitted. And so what did we see there? We saw a plugin action. So if I just come back here, so if I come into generative actions here, you can see all these different actions that we've authored. We had the leave, check, and submit, which is what we just used there. And so for our last experience that we wanted to enable for our end users, we wanted to have them be able to check what the chances of it raining tomorrow is, right? So what is the weather going to be tomorrow? What is the weather today? And to do this, Adam has essentially gone in and authored two different plugins here, two different actions here, sorry. We have the MSN weather action for current weather. So for today, I can get that experience, and then the weather for tomorrow. And so that is, I mean, for typically that is way too close for comfort and trying to actually distinguish. But what we're going to see here is this is going to be, we're going to essentially test that out. And what's really interesting is, unlike that previous experience with the leave, check, and submit action, which was part of a topic, we're going to enable dynamic chaining for that experience. So that means anywhere in this Copilot Studio experience or this Copilot experience for your end user, they can prompt the Copilot and it will provide this a response with those outputs based on your inputs anytime in that experience. So we can see here, if we, instead of having to put it as part of a Copilot and control that experience, we can just have our end users who's feeling a little bit nervous about the chances of raining tomorrow, doesn't know what to wear, to be able to deal with the conditions as he's going out there to talk about Power Platform with all these different customers. they can ask, okay, what are the chances of it raining tomorrow in Sydney? And we can get that response here. And so if I click in and I just hit this toggle here, you can see it's taken these inputs and it provided the relevant outputs that we might want to make available through this dynamic chaining experience. The one we use here was rain chance. So we got what was it? The rain chance, there we go, 82% there. So this was essentially the variable that we used. And so you can see all these other ones that we could make available or avail of in our Copilot experience as well as an end user. So that was generative answers, so chatting over your own data, and then actions where we're able to talk to our systems of record and provide those inputs, get those outputs when necessary. Of course, as I pointed out a number of times today in our slides, we can extend with our Microsoft Copilots through these different plugins. And so we won't cover that in today's session, exactly how to do that. But once we've essentially built out those plugin scenarios, we can come in here and publish that experience. So if we had the plugins authored, or we are happy with our Copilot, our standalone Copilot, we can come in here, we publish our experience, and then we can actually make it available in the channel of your choice. If you're using, if you want to publish it back, those plugins back into your Copilot, your first party Copilot, this is where you'd be doing that. So currently we have M365 Copilot in preview, where you could be publishing those plugins back into your experience. If you wanted to have those standalone Copilots, as I mentioned, you have all these different channels for your specific role types, specific user experiences, to make sure that it's available in the channel of their choice. So we see a lot of the times it's being leveraged in Microsoft Teams. We have it in your custom sites, of course, in Power Pages, in Power Apps, or in your custom applications, and of course across social channels. And we have WhatsApp that will be shortly joining the group here, as well as the social channel available. So the other element to definitely touch on is the fact that when we were going through that experience and we talked to SharePoint, we made sure we were authenticated. So we can actually ensure that there's strong security parameters around what is being accessed, what do we want to make sure is accessed and what isn't accessed, right? And so those different systems of record, you're still going to be managing that through your role-based access there and your security groups. And of course, you can leverage essentially these authentication capabilities to make sure that you've authored your Copilot to be as compliant as you possibly can there. I'm conscious of time now, so I'm going to pop back into our slides. Let me go here. And so this is what we've been able to achieve for Adam. But what I want to do is just touch quickly on the fact that we're also able to extend these different experiences, as I've talked to before, with our Pro-Code capabilities. And so this is essentially, this slide here represents the full breadth of capabilities from Azure that you can use with Copilot Studio, whether it's to extend your language models, your knowledge bases, development processes, down to your analytics and telemetry here. And so when I talk about conversational orchestration, there are going to be times where I don't want to leverage generative AI, and many customers will ask us how they can remain in control of what their Copilot is going to say. And I might want to have it essentially go, I understand what your user is actually saying, but I don't want to necessarily route it to a generative AI capability. I might just want to say, I don't know, because you don't always want to generate an answer using generative AI capabilities. And a good example is that I don't want my Power Hour Incorporated employees who wants to know, for example, how to and where to publish these sacred Power Hours to be asking generative AI capabilities what they should do next. This is where we would look at our FAQ or our scripted responses here. And so here's essentially, I want to say, in these scenarios, I want to say, this is exactly how you would answer that question. So for these Power Hour employees, we would say, this is exactly how you're going to answer that question. You're going to publish it to our Power Hour channel and stop being hungry for YouTube fame, guys. And so this is really where you're going to be taking advantage of these manually authored topics, or you're able to plug in, of course, to the traditional Q&A capabilities of your custom question answering in Azure, for example. And so this is essentially where you're assembling your Copilot to say, we want control here. But then, of course, in this next part, this is where you might want to release some control to generative AI. So that the next level down, this is where you can do that, where you start pointing to your generative answers, as we saw before, to start chatting over your data. You're using generative actions to be able to talk to your systems of record via these kind of low-code API connectors. And then, of course, they might also want to be looking at more complicated scenarios where you want to plug into a custom model that you've trained in Azure AI Studio. And then lastly there, what do you do when you don't have an answer or you want to orchestrate scenarios that are best handled by a human? Like if we have someone who wants to negotiate a partnership contract with Power Hour Incorporated, and we don't want that necessarily being dealt with generative AI in our Copilot. We don't want our Copilot even handling that conversation. That's where we would look to pass that conversation to our live 24/7 Power Hour support staff there. So as we kind of come to a close here, I did promise at the top of the call we're going to talk about licensing, and so it's quite fantastic with Copilot Studio. We essentially, with your standalone Copilot Studio licensing, you're essentially paying $200 a month for your tenancy. You have these capacity packs, and each one of those capacity packs comes with 25,000 messages per month. And so, of course, this also includes pretty powerful capabilities in being able to essentially talk to not only your standard connectors, but also your premium connectors, your custom connectors. The only caveat to just mention there with the messages is essentially that a generative AI response, like the ones we saw with generative answers or generative actions, that's going to be 2 messages to the traditional 1 message from a non-generative AI response. We also, of course, have Copilot Studio for M365, and that is essentially included with your M365 license. And this is where you can build those plugin scenarios and, of course, publish it back into M365. But of course, these numbers are the published numbers there in terms of prices, that is. But of course, please do talk to your license providers, and of course, just look at potentially what agreements you might have, just to understand exactly what your pricing may be for these different licensing types. So as we wrap up here, I just want to cover what we saw today. So we started at the beginning with some generative AI era of AI core elements that we wanted to cover, and what some of the blockers have traditionally been around conversation AI in trying to help users or companies realize the value of conversational AI. But then we talked about Copilot. We talked about what Copilot Studio is, how these interplay together. We talked about essentially the different tools when it comes to building out your Copilot experience and who is engaged with those different tools, what tools are best suited for different audiences, and how they all work together, most importantly. This is not a versus, this is an and conversation. And of course, at the end, we saw Adam building out his fantastic Power Hour Incorporated Copilot inside Microsoft Copilot Studio before we touched on the very fun licensing topic there. And so if I come to the end here, yeah, we also have some really great links here to get you started. aka.ms try Copilot Studio. I may have kind of given us a little bit of a glimpse of that in the demonstration. That's where you're going to go to start getting started today and build up and have those kind of trial experiences and get started testing out these different capabilities. We also have some really great sites here if you want to look at the community page, if you want to get really deep into the different documentation, what capabilities, and get deep into the documentation that is here as well, and of course the Copilot Studio website. So I will pause there and I'll let Nathan join me on camera. There we go.
Thank you very much for that, Jack.
Hey,
absolutely
Nathan.
Fantastic session, mate. I love that quote that you just used there towards the end about Azure and Copilot Studio. That's not a versus, it's an and. So
exactly.
I think that's a great quote there to take out. And yeah, also love the Power Hour employee Copilot that you built there.
I thought you'd enjoy that. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, so before we get into some Q&A, I might just talk about our next session. So we have an exciting session coming next month with Sanya Singh, and it's going to be all about Power Automate. Sanya Singh is the Vice President of Power Automate, so it's great to have another one of our product leaders on to talk about all the great things that are happening with Power Automate, some of the roadmap. We might even get a partner or a customer on to talk about their experience with Power Automate as well. So yeah, definitely look out for that one coming in the next month. But just having a look at some of the questions here, Jack. We've got one of the questions which has been asked by one of the attendees. What Power Platform connectors do you get with M365 Copilot versus the standalone? Is that one that you can answer, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. So that essentially it's a good question. I think essentially with both of those licenses, you're going to get that full Power Platform connector library with the standalone license, whether it's the standalone Copilot Studio license or the Copilot Studio in Copilot for M365. The key difference there is essentially what channel you want to publish what you create. So if a user actually wants to use that Power Platform connector outside of the context of their M365 Copilot, they're going to have to purchase a standalone Copilot license there. So that's just the important caveat. You do have access to those connectors, but it will depend on essentially making sure that if you're looking at it from a plugin perspective, you're only using it within that experience.
No worries, mate. That's fantastic. And there's a question here which I might answer, which is a attendee has asked around the accuracy of documents and how we can fine-tune the model for SharePoint documents. So I guess there's probably a couple of great references that you can look at in regards to how do you actually build Copilot Studio bots. And the first one of those being the implementation guide. So one of the folk, I think Fushan or one of the production teams actually put a link to that in the chat. So that's an absolutely fantastic resource to understand where some of those ceilings are when it comes to Copilot Studio, when you might need to actually integrate an Azure OpenAI model into your Copilot. As an example, for that particular scenario, that might be something that you need to do further grounding in your Azure OpenAI model and then integrate back into your Copilot Studio. But yeah, the implementation guide is a fantastic place to go and have a look at some of those resources as well. Question for you, Jack. Can we do IVR with Copilot Studio?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those that don't know what IVR means, that's interactive voice response. And so this is essentially, if anyone's not familiar with that acronym, it is going to be available in Copilot Studio. It's going to be available next month. So that native voice integration in Microsoft Copilot Studio is going to be available. It's going to dramatically improve that voice-enabled bot scenario for customers, and that's all done through the voice channel in omni-channel for customer service there. So look out for that one. Yeah.
Yeah, great answer, mate. Another one that we have got is, can you do all the same things with the plugins in Copilot for M365 that you showed in the presentation?
Currently, there's a limitation technically, not from a licensing perspective, but a technical limitation. So in M365 Copilot, you can, of course, when you're creating those plugins, you can only create a single turn read-only response. So you're basically, unlike, of course, in Copilot Studio, where you can have that multi-turn response in text, you're essentially limited to just that reading. But of course, essentially, we're really working as a product team to kind of enable the multi-turn experience conversational plugin with that ability to both read and write, and yeah, just have that multi-turn experience.
Yeah, thanks for that one, Jack. Another question that we commonly get is it available in Australia? So I think the answer to that is if your environment's created in Australia, then it is available and all your data will be processed within Australia. So that's been that way since late last year. So that's an awesome advantage that we have being based in Australia. Some other regions aren't at the level where they can process it locally yet. So that's great for us.
Yeah, that is a really great advantage for sure, that you don't have to share data overseas. Brilliant.
And given we've got a little bit of time, mate, do you have any other common questions? I guess, you work a lot with Copilot Studio with customers. Any other questions that you get from customers? Any generalized questions that you have?
Yeah, no, I think of course there's plenty of questions. They're always coming when it comes to Copilot Studio, and I'd say one of the big ones is just how do we get started now? Like, can we get a trial license? Can we get going? And you can absolutely do that. So that link that hopefully we can also provide in the chat, that trial capability, you can go in there, you spin up your Copilot Studio trial and get started today. That's probably one of the biggest things I get asked is like, okay, how do we actually get going outside of licensing, of course? And outside of that, yeah, I think there are a number of, I think, integration scenarios where we get questions around this, where people want to understand exactly, as you pointed out, Nathan, that and story. So how do we work together with all these different scenarios? Who works on what? And so that's why I specifically made sure that we, in today's conversation, we talked about who are the different stakeholders that are involved, and how do they all work together to actually build out this overall Copilot experience. Because in a lot of these scenarios, you're not just going to be building a Copilot Studio, a Copilot exclusively with potentially just Copilot Studio. There will be scenarios where you will have those elements, as I pointed out in the presentation, where you want to extend with different capabilities from a pro code lens. So most customers will want to start with Copilot Studio because it just gets them there so much faster. And then, of course, they can leverage specifically these different skill sets for the different needs. So as I pointed out in the presentation, more of those low code users, people with domain proficiency as part of that build process. And of course, Fusion teams are always great to have professional developers also doing this. And then most importantly, we want to make sure that we're not burdening our professional developers in building out those Copilot experiences. We want them building out those really powerful capabilities in Azure AI Studio, those custom models, those custom scenarios, and then publishing that to be available for your different low code users to use in their Copilot experiences. Because we want that essentially be this people to really focus on what they're best at in building out these experiences and essentially working to complement each other.
Yeah, and if you haven't tried building a Copilot, it's ridiculously easy to do. So if you have access to do it, then yeah,
please do.
I highly encourage you to go and check it out and try it. And I think you'll be impressed, because most people that we show how easy it is and how easy it is to sort of integrate with some of that Gen AI capability, a lot of wows in the room. So that's it's great to see that. So maybe just a bit of an update of some things that are coming in the future. So we have our Wave release plans, which for 2024, that's going to be what we're going to release across the Power Platform from April to September this year. And some of the features that will be coming to Copilot Studio, we have greater analytics around Gen AI. So people are asking questions around Gen AI at the moment within the context of a Copilot. There's not a great deal of analytics around what's being asked and where, I guess, the gaps are in regards to topics and questions that haven't been fulfilled. So there's going to be greater analytics coming. It's planned for public preview in May to be able to get some details around where your Copilot is or isn't helping your end users when it comes to generative AI. So then you can go and build out either a custom topic or update your generative AI model to be able to fulfill those needs. Another interesting one is around channels that are going to be published to as well. So you could see some of the channels that we can publish to, but if you're a predominant Teams user in your organization, it's really easy to publish these custom Copilots to Teams. It's literally a couple of clicks of a button. So if you do use Teams in your organization, definitely check out those channels that you can publish to. And we're actually announcing, as a part of the Wave 1 release plans as well, some additional channels. So chat and SMS via Azure Communication Services will be coming as well. So I think that's planned for public preview in May as well. So yeah, just a couple of other channels to be able to check out. You'll be able to sort of have a Copilot experience, I guess, through SMS. And also WhatsApp as well is coming as a part of that supported.
That's a great, well. Just to add there, Nathan, that's a great, I mean, obviously all of that is really going to be powerful. I think that the WhatsApp scenario is really going to open it up to a lot of different markets. I think that was the one social channel that was kind of missing there, and it's going to be really great to just kind of fill in the full gap there. And so yeah, these are only just an a taste of essentially what the updates are coming forward. So it's going to be so exciting to just see how that UI for Copilot Studio evolves over the next few months. What capabilities are going to be enabled natively? Because right now it feels like a pretty powerful experience, but I just can't wait to see where it goes next, because there's just so much investment coming into this area specifically. And of course, I can imagine that because we keep talking about these and scenarios where you're working together, I can imagine this is going to become a lot more seamless going forward. And so, yeah, very much. It's an exciting space to be in, that's for sure, working with Copilot Studio.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's an awesome tool, and obviously works really well with some of our other products, like as a part of the Power Platform, like AI Builder. And I think that there's a big or a huge raft of updates, and you'll probably hear more about it next month on our Power Automate Power Hour, but specifically around prompting and having a prompt library and help Copilot to help you build out the perfect prompt, so to speak. How we can actually ground our data with Dataverse. We can classify and specify and train our prompts based on existing Dataverse data. This is all stuff that's coming as a part of the new Wave release, and it'll obviously impact all of the Power Platform products, but it'll have a crucial role to play in Copilot Studio as well. So if you haven't checked it out, we might put the link to the Wave release plan in the chat. There's also a cool video which is online as well that we can post. That just gives you a bit of a summary of all of that across Power Platform, but heavily focused on Copilot Studio. With that, Jack, I'd just like to thank you very much for today's session. Absolutely fantastic presentation, and thank you to Scott and Fu Shen, who have been answering all the questions in the background as well. And also thanks to the production team and everybody that's helped organize the session. And of course, the attendees. We wouldn't be able to do these sessions without you as well. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the bootcamp. There's a number of different sessions to go still in the bootcamp. So if you haven't had a look check out those. Myself and Fu Shen will be doing a governance session in a couple of hours. Well, actually, I think it's even sooner than that. So we better get prepared. But yeah, there's plenty of sessions still to come today, so definitely check out those, and there's also a few in the coming days as well. So hope you enjoyed today's Power Hour, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.